Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. Welcome to episode 23.
Well, to continue with my random facts about numbers, 23 is the lowest consecutive prime number.
So like 2 and then 3?
2 and then 3, but 23, the number itself, is prime. So primes are important.
It's also the retired number of basketball great Michael Jordan, who was mentioned prominently in the book we're going to review today.
Ooh, spoilers.
All right, but before we get to the book review, you had something you'd written down here you want to talk about with your workstation.
Oh, so that's just a really random note because I had this moment the other day and I wanted to share that with you. Like, I think in the very first episode, we talked about our weird love of things for no reason. And I talked about, we talked specifically about the playmat that I wasn't able to walk away from.
Right.
We talked about, I just love clicky noises. And so I have a clicky keyboard and I like my clicky pens and I click them way too much and it drives Nicole crazy. Well, I had this moment the other day when I was logging into telework into my accounting firm. And it was just like, I just had this Zen moment where everything was exactly the way I wanted it to be. Like a few months ago, I built a brand new computer that is just banging. Like I love this machine. It's great in every sense of the word. And I found a great deal on an ultra-wide monitor, and I had never had an ultra-wide monitor before, so I was a little skeptical. But man, Ben, I'm never going back. It is so much nicer having an ultra-wide than it is having two monitors. I love it.
That sounds fantastic.
Well, not only that, but then I don't know how I convinced Nicole to do this. I think I just wore her down. You
built a desk.
Yes, I built a desk in the kitchen. I found and cleaned up my clicky keyboard. So it's like crystal clean and like all the keys are perfect and shiny.
You got a new office chair?
We got new office chairs that match everything. I bought a monitor swing arm. I've never had a cantilever monitor arm. My monitors have always just been on whatever random base they come with, but this is like one of those big articulating ones that has huge range of motion. I can put the thing exactly where I want it to be. I bought an ergonomic mouse, that was something I experimented with like a couple of months ago, and I'm never going back. It's so nice for the
this is working from home done right.
Well, and this is the thing. I had this moment where I'm logging in and the monitor was just at the perfect height and my mouse was super comfortable. I just put my hand very naturally into it and my clicky keyboard just felt so good under my fingers and in my ears as I was typing in my password. And I just had this wave of content of this is what working on a computer should be like all the time.
Oh, that sounds sublime. I am so jealous. Okay, so I want to contrast everything. Are you done describing your Zen workstation experience?
I am. Yes.
Okay, I want to contrast mine with yours. So, in my house that was built in the 1980s, it has this weird thing that you've probably seen in old houses that are built in the 80s. It's like this little nook in the kitchen where the rotary dial phone used to sit and a little notepad used to sit next to it.
That's right.
So that's been my working from home office. So literally I have a wall about a foot from my right shoulder and my left shoulder is leaning against a wall and I'm in this little nook and I have a light shining over my head like I'm in an interrogation in a police officer. I have my government laptop, and I'll come back to the government laptop. I have connected to the government laptop an old monitor that I dug up that isn't being used for anything else in my house that I bought in 2003. It's a flat panel, but that's all it has going for it. I have a mouse that I don't know why, but for some reason the right mouse button doesn't send a clean signal to the computer, and so it always acts like I'm clicking and dragging instead of just clicking.
Oh, jeez.
Which you wouldn't, until you actually experience, you don't realize how frustrating it is to not be able to just context click.
It's just, how many times do you right click a day? You probably don't even know unless you have a problem with it.
Right. I'm using the keyboard that's on this government laptop that I've been issued.
Oh.
So government laptop keyboard, mouse that I supplied, 17-year-old monitor, and it's stuck in this little nook where I'm surrounded on three sides by plain off-white walls. That's my work experience.
That sounds like worse. That sounds like something that you would do in some kind of interrogation camp. Like, we're going to make you sit at this terrible workstation for 8 hours.
And at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to stop doing this. This sucks so bad. But as you know, government IT is its own kind of soul-sucking horrificness. It's filled with extras and add-ins that do things like make sure that I'm complying with the information assurance whenever I send an email, and it's scanning my computer for vulnerabilities, and I have the VPN and 8 different like virus scanning clients, and the hard drive is spinning constantly. It's sluggish. Sometimes the keys don't even respond because it's so busy just checking itself. It's abysmal. And I think I look at it and I feel so frustrated. I think it doesn't have to be this way. Like, I could just be having a bring your own device experience using the latest software on new hardware and just working productively without this constant stressing and waiting and being frustrated with my IT. So, congrats to you, my friend. I guess I have to quit working for the government to have a Zen workstation moment.
I just wanted to bring up like a nice, like pleasant moment that I had in my life. I didn't mean to put you through some PTSD thing.
Oh man, it's like the beginning of Joe versus the volcano. He's sitting there in the office and the neon lights are flashing overhead and it's sucking his soul. Yeah, I
didn't mean to kick you while you were down, dude. Sorry about that.
But you know what? I don't resent you for this. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you had this Zen workstation moment where you're just satisfied with all of your IT and you can just focus on the task at hand.
Yes, it was glorious.
Okay. So, during the week, I'd sent you a note about an experience I'd had for a completely unrelated reason. And you were like, man, that's a really weird thing you did. And to me, it seemed kind of normal. So I wanted to bring it up on the podcast so we could discuss it. So what I'd done was I had someone that I used to supervise back in 2012, and we kind of lost touch. And the Air Force gives you the opportunity to kind of, I'll say it this way because I know this is what you're going to suggest, cyberstalk people, where like you can just look them up in the directory and you can see what unit they're in and you can kind of get a sense for, what job they have and those kinds of things. And frequently, like during the year, whenever there's a promotion rotation, you can look on the list and see if they got promoted or not and those kinds of things. So there's ways that are very public that you can just know things about people. So anyway, I was wondering how this one staff sergeant that used to work for me was doing, and I looked him up and I saw that he was at another unit similar to the unit that we were at when we were together, which meant he was kind of doing the same job again, but he'd been promoted one rank from staff sergeant to technical sergeant, and I just sent him a note asking him how he was doing.
Okay, that's incredibly weird. That's incredibly weird. Like
why?
For so many reasons, Ben. For so many reasons. Okay, so. How long ago were you two stationed together? Like, when did you actually meet?
Okay, so we met in April of 2012, and we worked together until like January of 2014. So we hadn't seen each other in 6 years.
So 6 years. Zero contact with this person for 6 years.
Right.
Okay. And then you email him out of the blue, and like this is what really caught my attention is because you forwarded me a portion of the emails that you had sent, and like your opening statement is like picking up in the middle of a conversation that you stopped having like 10 minutes ago. There's no like preamble of explanation of like, hey, remember me? We worked together. I was just curious on how you were doing, and then launch into your thing. There was none of that. It was just, hey, I see you're at this base. How's that working out for you? And it's just like. On the receiving end, if I had received something like that, I'm like, who is this weirdo and why is he emailing me? Because he didn't preface it or bring it up anywhere in the message.
Okay. All right. But let's change your assumptions to make it so like it was someone that there would be no mistaking on either end of the interaction about whether or not you would remember the person. Like our interaction was daily and deep. There was no like, hey, remember me. That wasn't necessary.
Okay. From your perspective, it wasn't necessary.
No. It's not necessary. It isn't.
Just flat out.
He replied to my message, if you remember. That was also in the segment that I sent to you.
That is also in the segment you sent to me, was he did respond to you, and he did like launch into the conversation. Now, however, my counter argument to that point is how many messages did you send him previous to that went completely unresponded to?
I think I'd emailed him twice before that he didn't respond. Once was after he'd left my base. He went, I think, to the Azores or something, or Diego Garcia or something like that. And I just sent him a message asking him if he made it okay and if everything was all right. And he never replied. I don't know if he even got that one. And I think the other time I emailed him was after he got promoted to technical sergeant. I think I just sent him a message and said, "Hey, I saw you on the promotion list. Congratulations."
Okay, so you had sent him 2 messages previously. This is the third one. Third complete shot in the dark to see if he'd respond to you. That's a little weird.
Okay.
How many emails do you send a day to random people from your past that don't get responded to? It seems like it could be a huge time sink.
Day isn't a big enough sample size. I'd say in a year, I probably will send off a random message like this to about a dozen people. This is just a habit I have. If someone crosses my mind and I think about that they meant something to me, that they were a valuable part of my life, that I learned something from them in the past, or I wonder what they're up to, I'll just do this. I'll stop what I'm doing, send them a message, and send it off. And sometimes it never gets answered. Sometimes they just give kind of a curt, not really interested in engaging kind of reply. And sometimes it opens up a valuable dialogue that I'm really grateful for. That happened one time notably in the last year.
That is just like you're talking about it in such positive terms that it makes me feel bad for trying to tear down this temple that you've built in your mind. But from my perspective, this is crazy talk. Like I don't even like if I got emails like this from a random person, like if somebody from the Air Force years and years ago sent me an email, I would honestly, I probably wouldn't respond to it, first of all, because I'm not that kind of person. But if they kept sending me emails after I didn't respond, I would start getting freaked out. Like, is this guy going to show up at my house? Like, what's his end game here?
Okay, I'll push back a little bit. Again, if you'd been in the Air Force for 14 years and for each of those 14 years you had an annual performance report, and on 2 of those performance reports the first signature was this person, you would remember that person.
I lost track of the math. You're talking about a commander that you had for how many years?
2 years.
2 years. So you had a command. Oh, no.
No, not a commander. This is your direct supervisor.
Yes, this was your direct report guy for 2 straight years.
Yes.
But Ben, how many people have you had directly report to you for 2 straight years throughout your career?
Not as many as I'd like. And that's one of the reasons I feel connected to these kind of people. Because ever since 2014, I've just been a staff officer and I've supervised virtually no one. I've supervised like 3 people. So, when I was in Italy, I supervised 17 people. And so I kind of miss it. And I keep track of those 17 people. They have a special place in my mind and heart.
See, right there, you say that, and like you say it so well, and it sounds like, oh, this guy really cares. But like all the klaxons are going off in my head. Like nobody cares about other people. Not people that they saw 6 years ago. Not 14 of them. That doesn't make sense to me. Like it doesn't check any of the boxes in my head. So I think this is a phenomenon that's well known and you understand it in other contexts. Like for instance, if you ever see like a 75th anniversary of World War II veterans and they remember the names of everyone from their platoon that they fought with, in the trenches in France or something like that. Don't you dare compare yourself and your guys that you were in Italy with doing running the mail, the freaking post office. Don't compare yourselves to World War II veterans. So you didn't die together.
The phenomenon I'm talking about is that under kind of more stressful circumstances, you tend to build stronger relationships. Like I'm guessing the people that you served with on your 6-month deployment to Afghanistan, you remember a little better than any other 6-month streak in your career.
I don't remember any of their names, no. But I will. But dang it, Ben, I have to give you this because I could rattle off a ton of names of people that I went to the academy with. Yeah. And I do stay in touch with a lot of them. And, okay, so you got me there.
I mean, it's not always getting shot at. It's just the stressfulness of the circumstances. And I got to tell you, the unit that I was at in Italy, it was stressful. First of all, it was 2012, which was 4 years after what was called the Minot incident. I don't know if you're familiar with the Minot incident, but what happened at Minot Air Force Base in 2008, there was basically a series of unfortunate events that was virtually like the 3 Mile Island of nuclear weapons in the U.S. Air Force, where they had a B-52 that carried air-launched cruise missiles, where as part of a training exercise, they loaded up dummy weapons on the left side of the aircraft and live weapons on the right side of the aircraft, and when the air crew came out and did the check on the jet, they checked the left side of the aircraft that had the dummy weapons on it and flew from North Dakota to Louisiana and landed on the airfield, and live nuclear weapons sat on the airfield unguarded for 18 hours.
Whoa. So I'd heard, I'd only heard the headlines of this whole thing, that a B-52 flew with live nuclear weapons as a mistake from one place to another. But I don't think I ever heard the fact that they sat unguarded for a while.
Yeah. 18 hours. And you could fill, a 200-page diary with all the things that went wrong here. General Kaler at the time, when he told us about the incident after it happened, he called it the death of 1,000 cuts. It was there was infinite things that went wrong. So many, in fact, that the blame could not rest on any 40 people. It had to go all the way to the top. And it did. The Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force was fired over this. And they were in the process of standing up Air Force Cyber Command and instead spent their 3-star general on Air Force Global Strike Command and consolidated the execution of all the nuclear missions under a single 3-star that's now a major command in the United States Air Force.
I remember that. That was a huge political thing for internal Air Force politics for reasons that we're not going to get into because they're very boring.
Anyway, right following this 2-year period of all this upheaval that happened because of this massive failure of basically just this atrophy of the discipline in the nuclear enterprise, the result was a lot of scrutiny. It became listed on all of the documents the number one priority. Our number one priority as the United States Air Force at the time was revitalizing the nuclear enterprise. So when I PCSed to Italy, we lived an hour and a half from the nearest actual American base, 3 hours from the nearest Air Force base, and yet we had all of the scrutiny of the Secretary of the Air Force and the Defense Threat Response Agency for making sure that we were appropriately conducting all of the infinite nuance of the nuclear mission. So to say that job was just like being on vacation in Italy is to way understate how stressful that was at that time.
It sounded like you were on vacation in Italy.
It was terrible. Imagine any of the worst stretches you had at the academy, and it was like that on my daily job. Like I mentioned that time where we had to cancel the 50th anniversary party because we had a few findings in between inspections. It was like that. It was just this constant stress and scrutiny, that the commander was going to get fired, that they were going to find something, and heads were going to roll because they did not want it to turn into the Minot incident again.
Do you still have stress dreams about it?
No. Like you said, I just kind of remember it fondly. I just remember, a lovely time in Italy. But my wife does. She reminds me. She's like, no, I never saw you, and you were always stressed out.
So this is the reverse pregnancy thing, where after a few years, mothers have a great thing.
You forget about it. I'd be willing to do it again. Yeah, I'll go back.
Yeah, the pregnancy wasn't that bad. But then us on the other side, like, no, it was terrible. You hated your life.
Don't you remember?
Made me suffer. Yeah, you remember.
Yeah, it was like that. So this, even though I was, stationed in Italy, that job felt as stressful or more stressful than my deployment to Afghanistan when I was getting shot at.
Okay, so to bring it all back around, so I then retract my statement. You may compare yourself to a World War II veteran because you experienced a significant amount of stress. And you have kept in touch with all, you said 14 of your direct reports?
17, but yeah.
17. And have they all responded to your emails at one point or another?
I'm friends with about half of them on social media. We maintain somewhat regular contact.
Are you allowed to be friends with people that directly reported to you?
Once they're not in my chain of command anymore.
I guess that's valid. Okay.
And several of them have gotten out of the Air Force, and I'm friends with civilian so-and-so.
All right, so this might be then, maybe this is less weird than I initially thought it was. Okay, maybe this is a thing that happens in the world and I'm just not aware of. But I'm of the opinion of, maybe this is my fault. Because I remember Nicole and I were having a discussion just the other day, and we were talking about how somebody was being extra nice to us. Like they were like, I don't remember the context or who it was, but they were like either texting or they were like gave us a phone call and they were just being nice. And that immediately put us both on the suspicious defensive. Like, what are you buttering me up for?
Yeah.
We're both the kind of people like when, I don't know, maybe so many terrible things have just happened to me, Ben, or I'm just so cynical and jaded by the world that when people are nice to me and I don't understand why immediately, I think they're trying to get something out of me.
But you're trying to attribute to a general sense rather than something specific. Like, this is out of the ordinary for this person. So maybe that's what triggered your alarm.
Maybe, but at the same token, this is within your character. But again, you haven't seen this guy in 6 years. And so from his perspective, this is coming out of left field.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm willing to, I'm willing to accept it if I'm just a weirdo. Okay, I'll take that.
Well, no, hang on a second. We've established that. I think we established that episode 2 or 3.
That's been well documented on this podcast.
So what we're defining now is we're just trying to fine-tune this slider a little bit.
We've already established you're a weirdo. We're just trying to figure out how weird. Okay. Great. Let's transition to a mistake you made last time on the podcast.
Oh, you see, and he comes in right to cut my legs out from under me. I'm proud of you, Ben. Good job. Good. So this is the bad at parenting moment that I had. On the last podcast, episode 22, we were talking about my son, and I said that he was 7. And I was sure. I was absolutely sure that he was 7. And it took my wife listening to the podcast and reminding me, your son's 8. And then I had this, chuckled it up. I had to stop and count on my fingers. What did I say? Oh, crap. He is 8. When did that happen? Oh,
well, we talked about his birthday party on the podcast. So, a couple of months ago.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But who remembers birthdays, right? So I have one tattoo that I got when I turned 30, because when I turned 30, I wanted to do something immature.
Do I know this? Have I seen? I don't know if I've seen this.
You've seen this. Oh, come on. No,
Wait. It's the crest from The Legend of Zelda.
Yes, I have. Yes. Yeah, I have the crest of the royal family with the Triforce on my shoulder.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember.
It's cool because if people don't know what it is, then they think it's just like some Roman legionnaire thing, and it's awesome. And then people that do know what it is, it gives me amazing nerd cred.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is the only tattoo I have on my body, and probably the only tattoo I will ever get. However, I have thought about the alternate tattoos. If I was to get another tattoo, and I have a couple ideas. One is from another video game, but the other is very important, is on my fingers of my left hand. Across the inside of each finger, I would have tattooed just a date, just a 6-digit date, so I wouldn't forget them. And this is the order. It would be
okay. Go ahead.
It would be Nicole's birthday.
Wife.
Wife. It would be our anniversary. It would be my son's birthday.
Okay.
And then it would be my daughter's birthday. Just so I would, because one, those are pieces of information that people are constantly asking me for.
Sure.
And two, it would just help me never to ever forget them.
Yeah. I could see that being useful. I think the technology is going to reach the point where it kind of is so ubiquitous that, like augmented reality kind of thing, where this won't be a problem at some point in the future.
Yes, but my shackled AI will constantly remind me of when these important dates are coming up.
Yeah, like Jeeves or I forget Tony Stark's
Jarvis,
yeah, or Karen for Peter Parker.
Yeah, the problem. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, the problem with that is going to be, oh, sir, don't forget your anniversary is in a week. Would you like to order a present now? But no, snooze. I'll take care of that tomorrow.
And if she's good, she'll do it anyway.
Right, exactly.
Ignore the prime directive. Do not listen to me when I make bad decisions. Well, as you know, I have 6 kids. And I know you were joking earlier when I was going to give you a hard time about not remembering how old your son is, that you were like, oh, well, you, of course, remember all your children's birthdays. Well, my wife and I very deliberately had our children on a 2-year rotation so that we could keep track of this. So right now my kids are 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20.
That's wonderful, and also shut up. You did not plan this out for the ease of logistics.
So right. Once my daughter's birthday happens, it just all goes to heck, and I can't remember any of it. And I have to do that thing where I'm always counting backwards and figuring out the same thing over and over and over, like I hadn't already done this 100 times.
Yeah, what is with that? Like, we can't... Like, my son is 8. My son is 8. My son is 8. You'd think that would be an easier fact to remember than the date that he was born and then do the calculations every single time I need that piece of information.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. Cannot account for that one.
Are there other pieces of information in our life that are like this, where it's one piece of information, but you always end up remembering the other thing and then working your way back around to the first thing? That's a question for our listeners. Listeners, what is the thing in your life that you're supposed to remember A, but instead you always remember B, and you have the little thing that transforms B into A?
I feel this way anytime I have to log into a website that forces me to use like a non-standard version of my username or a different version of my password, so that then I have to remember a different one of and or both, and I can never come up with the right combination of the two, and I lock my account.
Oh, well, this is why, like, I've been doing this for a while, and this is my advice to you in the digital era. First of all, you're not supposed to use the same password all over the place, right? I know everybody listening, you're not supposed to use the same password. I'm sure nobody uses the same password on every single website. But my recommendation is to use an algorithm. You have the same set algorithm that, depending on the site that you're looking at, generates the password that you're supposed to put into it.
I have a full-scale rant I want to do on this, but I'm going to save it for another time.
A full-scale rant about passwords and security?
Yes.
Ooh. Are you one of those? All right, so are you a biometrics proponent?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
hey, buddy, thumb $100 to save the clock tower.
I agree with you. We should save this for later, because I think you and I could have a very heated discussion about public key interface, and that's going to save the world.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the NIST standards that led to the password conundrum that we currently live under nowadays, which we're trying to get out from under. But
conundrum is a strong word for you, Ben. Like, back it down a little bit.
All right, well, let's transition to bad at English. When I was in meetings in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, frequently I'd hear them use the phrase. There would be a system they were describing, like, for instance, I was in the enterprise where we would evaluate functional system security packages. So they would come up and say, hey, I have this new airframe that we're going to be adding, like the Joint Strike Fighter. We're going to be adding the Joint Strike Fighter, and we need to plug in the system that downloads all of the maintenance data and puts it into the database, but we got to connect it to the rest of the network. I'd be like, that's fine, you can connect to the rest of the network, but you have to comply with these protocols and install this security wrap. And I would evaluate the architecture and help them budget. But inevitably, there would be this thing where then I would tell them that they would have to purchase the contract from British Telecom in order to get the managed service for the security feed. And they would without fail usually say some form of the following phrase: well, that's a bit of a self-licking lollipop.
Yes. The bureaucracy that exists only to support the bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. So we make all these rules that say you got to do these things, and then the rules fund the people that make the rules that say you got to do these things.
I'm looking at you, Defense Information Security Agency. DISA.
Yes, and NIST, the National Institute of Standards of Technology. So the British, for some reason, used the phrase self-licking lollipop. And when I tried to look it up in the U.S., we used the phrase self-licking ice cream cone. I don't know how, crossing the pond, we changed from a lollipop to an ice cream cone, but it means the same thing. Because
this is America, Ben, and all of our food has to be way fatter than English food and way better tasting.
But as far back as I could go, it seemed to be Irish in origin. So that was one that originated over in the Isles and crossed the pond and transformed from a lollipop to an ice cream cone. But basically a self-perpetuating system that has no other purpose than to sustain itself.
I think everybody in the world has had experience with some form of self-licking ice cream cone. And may not have heard the phrase, but people listening, you have dealt with a self-licking ice cream cone. Have you ever been to the DMV? That whole building exists just to lick itself.
Yeah. Well, and you get little ones now. I mean, you show up to the store and they're like, excuse me, sir, do you have a mask? No, I don't. Well, we'll be happy to sell you one before you can even enter the door to come in the store.
We have these wonderful sets of masks right here. It's too bad because to purchase it, you have to go inside, and you can't go inside without a mask. It's this catch-22 scenario that we're in.
Yeah. So we'd asked our audience to assist us in selecting a title. I'd forced the issue in having a nonfiction title, and I'd submitted 4 nominations. And the book that was chosen is a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, who is a professor of psychology at Stanford University.
Oh, I love professors of psychology, because whenever you read, they drive me nuts. These are the kinds of academic professions that exist only in academia, right? Like an actual psychologist does good things and tries to help people with their problems. But the academic psychology is all about just testing and writing papers to substantiate their academic career so they can continue to write papers. This is a self-licking ice cream cone in and of itself, the whole academic process.
Good example. So, and I think it's important to understand that this book, which came out, I think, in 2008 initially, by Carol Dweck, PhD, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, was her attempt. She'd been doing the kind of research you're talking about for 3 decades, where she had a theory about the way the human mind works, and then she was conducting laboratory research to validate and come up with the so what. Now that I think I know this about the way people's minds work, what can I use it for? So this book is her attempt at writing a popular piece that takes all of that peer-reviewed published papers and turning it into something that it's pop psychology that people can read.
She missed the mark, because this book was painful, Ben. Like I'm not a huge fan of nonfiction in the first place, one. But I am a fan of like hard nonfiction. I keep wanting to say good, but that's not a good enough qualifier. So like, for example, Freakonomics. I think Freakonomics is a fantastic book because that book is about numbers and math. And in math, you can have, actual statements that make sense that people can follow and you can't disagree with because it's math.
Yeah. And I won't disagree with you. The Freakonomics is a great book. Go ahead.
These books, these psychology books, like, again, this is like the last psychology book that we discussed, which was Scarcity. The concept is that the human brain is so complex and so complicated, and people's consciousness is so not understood that we can't observe it directly. Like, we can't say, oh, well, that's because switch A and switch B aren't firing, so you're getting results X, Y, and Z when you should be getting, R, S, and T. Since we can't look into the black box, we can only, we have to intuit different things about the mechanisms that are on the inside. And so what we have is psychologists that take very, very narrow focuses on things, and they draw a couple of points, and they draw this line, and that line will at some point extend into the black box. And so they're trying to say, oh, well, I discovered this line of behavior that has this indication of how people's brains work. My biggest problem with that is all of the studies they do and all of the examples they use are all anecdotal at best and hyper-focused to the point of not applying to anybody at worst. So
you beat that drum so effectively when we reviewed Scarcity that it was kind of, your voice was, the Josh simulator was playing in my mind while I was listening to this book for the second time. And I had that degree of skepticism, like you said, and yet I also feel like even when I disagree with the conclusions that the author is drawing based on their research, I still think that we're better off for the journey.
And this leads me to my next point about this book in particular. I went into it extremely skeptic because I'm very skeptical of most forms of psychology. However, this, like a tweaked version of what she's talking about in this book, is actually a fact that I kind of agree with. Mm-hmm. And so, like, all of the examples that she's giving and all of the anecdotes and all of the supposed studies that she's doing, I'm just groaning. Like, these are so refutable and so, like, debatable whether or not you actually got the results that you wanted to, or you completely screwed the test up or whatever. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying and I understand it. Please stop saying it in 1,000 words when 100 words would do.
Okay. Well, it wasn't that long of a book. I think it was 8 hours.
It was 10 hours. Oh, no, sir. It was 10 hours. I was acutely aware of that countdown timer.
Don't you ever speed up the speaking speed on your app?
So this is actually the first time I did that. You recommended that to me. I listened to 2 hours at normal speed. I'm like, Ben, I can't take it. And you're like, oh, just listen to it at like 4x. Well, let's not go crazy. I sped it up to 1.3, I think, is what I ended up listening to it on. And actually, that was a lot more palatable. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, okay, so first I'm going to give a synopsis of her underlying theory behind all of this. So basically, she has a single theory of mindset, as she calls it, and then you tell me if you agree or not with my description of her theory. Her theory is that basically you kind of have this binary mindset, and either your mindset is what she calls the fixed mindset, or your mindset is what she calls the growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is a belief that you have inherent traits that can be revealed and validated, and that anything you do is simply along those lines to reveal or validate inherent traits that you have. Or you have the growth mindset, and that's believing that you don't have some kind of fixed traits and that you can accomplish things based on the amount of effort that you put into them.
So, yes, I think that's a good summation of it. The way that I framed it in my mind as I was listening to the whole thing was... and honestly, once I made this connection in my head, I started listening to it, and I got a better experience out of it. This whole book, I feel like, is about agency. Whether or not you think change in your life is possible and who you think is responsible for it.
Yeah.
So in the fixed mindset, you think that you have no agency and that you are who you are and that your life is what it is and you have very little influence over it. In the growth mindset, you recognize that you do have control over your own life and over yourself and over your emotions and over your skills and over the decisions that you make to the point where you can and have the power to change your life.
Yeah. And that's the way this book is kind of posing as like a self-help text. Like let's help you get into the growth mindset so that you can believe that you have control over yourself and all those things that you just said to have success. And then she breaks it up. You know, there's a chapter on parenting, there's a chapter on work, there's a chapter on school, there's a chapter on relationships.
Those are my favorite chapters when she's breaking down these horrifically nonsensical or fictional conversations that no one on earth has ever had.
Okay. Well, let's take them one at a time. Because she said... so, I like how you said you had to get in the right frame of mind to be able to listen to this. Because I had a different frame of mind the second time I listened to it. Because I already knew what she said. And it's basically that she believed very deeply that over time her research has revealed to her that putting people into the growth mindset is the most effective way to be able to help them succeed and to be able to help other people succeed as well. So she thinks...
Whoa. You mean if you can convince people that they have control over their lives and actions, that will lead to positive change in their lives? Get out of town, Ben. That's crazy talk.
So I get that, Mr. Sarcastic. But the thing about that is here's what was ringing false for me this time. As she's going through the examples, every time she talks, okay, now let's talk business, now let's talk parenting, now let's talk sports, now let's talk relationships. She'll give an example of someone in the fixed mindset, and she'll give some reasons to show that the way they're behaving is evidence that they're in the fixed mindset. But the people she picked were very successful people.
Yeah, they're ridiculous outliers. These are not the kind of people you should be using as examples.
Well, yeah. So the thing I was asking myself is like, okay, if she's telling me that growth mindset is so bad, then how come these people that she's picking that are the pinnacle of accomplishment in their selected area, why am I supposed to think that they are just completely all wrong? And that helped me see it in a new way. So here's the question I was asking myself as I was listening to it this time. Okay, she's saying fixed mindset bad, growth mindset good. Like if I'm going to reduce this whole book to caveman terms, that's the basic talk.
Yep.
But there's got to be times that growth mindset is bad. What are those? And why is fixed mindset superior to growth mindset sometimes? So that's what I was asking myself as I was listening.
Okay, that's an excellent question because I can see, like off the top of my head, I can feel like there are times when a fixed mindset is very important. Because in her estimation, in her evaluation and discussion about all this stuff, is like when you reach these difficult times or you're finding you have this struggle or strife or negative responses in your life or negative emotions that you're having, you should look back on that with a growth mindset and be like, well, these feelings are affecting me. How can I change, or how can I develop in order to alleviate these feelings? Now, that's fine for a lot of situations, but what if sometimes you're just right? Like, you're just in a situation where you are correct and you are standing on principle or something like that, and it's somebody else that has more power politically or...
Right. So who's more likely to stand up? Somebody with a fixed mindset or somebody with a growth mindset?
Yeah. Is Captain America, like, he punched the Nazis in the face. He didn't stop and be like, hey, guys, let's talk about how our differences can be reconciled. No, he punched the Nazis in the face. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's immediately, that's the first time, is like, when you're standing up for truth and justice, not like necessarily Captain America, but like just standing up for what's right, because that's a hard thing to do. You need to have a fixed mindset. Like, these are my values and I've got to stand up for this.
Okay. And you're doing something I did as well as I was listening to, and that is that I contextualize it. But because I don't think anyone is all fixed mindset in every aspect of their life, or all growth mindset in every aspect of their life. In fact, I would contend that it's more of a spectrum in any one situation. You could even say this person might behave as though they had a fixed mindset in this particular context, but if you change the context a little bit, they would actually behave the opposite.
So, like, I don't know if you want to move away from this topic that you're talking about, but what you just said is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to psychological writing, is because you're taking something that is so complicated, so complex, and so multifaceted, like this purely original and unique thing that exists in the universe, that is the human consciousness, and you're going to boil it down to a toggle switch? Oh, they're either growth or they're fixed, and that's it. And that's how it all files down. It's like, I'm sorry, is there no other aspect of a person's, like, upbringing, social status, like geographical disposition at birth, or like any other facet of their brain that is important to this discussion? It's just
so I'm going to generalize about a place that we see this. Think of the stereotypical graduation speech, like high school commencement address, where you got a stadium full of people that are your bright, promising future high school graduates, and then all of their ancillary, all of the lower classmen that are there to watch, and the families and those kinds of things. And you're telling these aspiring young minds that they're going to go on and accomplish great things. And the epitome of that stereotypical commencement address is typically a very growth mindset speech. Believe in yourself. You can accomplish your dreams. You can be happy. You can be whatever you want to be. It's a very growth mindset thing. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think high school commencement speeches, well, good ones now. I will say the valedictorian of my high school stood up and basically gave a speech that was like an Oscar speech. Like, I would like to thank my family and all my teachers for believing in me for getting here. Oh, she did. Oh, she did. Which made it all the more sweeter when I gave my speech, and it was actually hey, we're all going to be fantastic. Let's go out and get them, everybody. Woo!
Were you the salutatorian?
So I was the salutatorian of my high school. I wasn't supposed to give a speech, but I was supposed to be the valedictorian. But then the valedictorian, who ended up being the valedictorian, was my ex-girlfriend. Her parents came in and threw such a hissy fit that they got
what?
They got banned. The band class that she had taken for all 4 years, they had that taken off of her transcripts, so that her GPA was higher than mine. And so So they told me that I would be allowed to give a speech after her as like a consolation prize. Like, listen,
dude, this sounds like a movie with Lindsay Lohan.
Well, at that point, I knew I was going to the academy. Like, it wasn't that big a deal to me, and I'm like, well, I still get to give a speech, so who cares, right?
Right. Huh.
The fact that it was
the text of the speech.
Oh no, but I'm sure my parents have it on VHS video from back in the day.
Would you say it was a growth mindset kind of speech?
I would say it was a very growth mindset speech. Yes, thank you, Ben.
Okay. So I made a list as I was trying to answer these questions, because she was talking so derogatorily about the fixed mindset. I thought, she keeps talking about these successful people and then saying, but they have the fixed mindset. Like, for instance, her first husband. So, she divorced the guy because he had a fixed mindset, but she picked him in the first place. And if I could talk to her, I'd be like, why'd you pick him in the first place? There had to have been something good of him that wasn't just in spite of the fixed mindset. It was because of the fixed mindset.
There were so many times when her personal bias just kind of flooded onto the page in such a jarring way that you're like, this feels like it shouldn't be in a book that you're trying to write to convince people of your own opinions. Like, for example, one of my favorites in the whole book was like, oh, and it's better to have a growth mindset. It reminds me of a time that I was sipping wine at breakfast in France that I took on a vacation with my second husband. It's like, lady, we don't care. We don't care about your fancy 2020 vacation.
I wrote down a quote from that exact passage because I loved it so much. She talked about how she was having breakfast in France and the people were being nice to her, which is exceptional because the French are normally jerks. And she said, and I quote, "In France, when they're nice to you, it feels like you passed a test. But in Italy, it's like there is no test." And I could say, having experienced both, that is so true. So if you want to go somewhere and feel people being nice to you, do not go to France. Go to Italy. There's no test.
Well, true or not, shut up, lady. I don't care. Like, if I'm buying a self-help book, I don't want to hear about your fancy vacation in the French Riviera.
She was trying to relate it to the topic at hand, but yes, it was a bit, yeah.
There was one passage where she went on a full-on tirade against millennials like there was no tomorrow, like to the point where I said out loud in my car, "Okay, boomer," because she was talking about...
And she is, too.
So totally.
I don't know if you watched like one of her YouTube videos, but yes.
The title, like the subtitle of the chapter was something like, "Will there ever be any great business leaders again?" And she goes on this whole thing about how, oh, well, this entire generation was raised on a fixed mindset that they're so smart and they're so special and they're all unique snowflakes that nobody's in a growth mindset. And how are they possibly ever going to lead? And I'm listening to this and like, okay, Ben, this really threw me when you said a couple minutes ago this was originally written in 2008 because I was convinced that this was written, it had to be written in like the late 1990s because there is no way, like I'm a millennial. And I'm in my like mid to late 30s now. And listen, lady, we're doing just fine. So stop freaking out about the millennials in the workforce. We've solved that problem.
Well, the version we read is an updated edition as of 2007. So I don't know when it was first published.
So what you're saying is that she went in and added like the tirade against millennials in the workforce. Yeah, I guess so. That was her update was to rant about the rising generation. And that's everybody needs to settle down. Like if you have a problem, all right, listeners, if you are one of the baby boomers, like you need to embrace your millennial cohorts. And the best way you can do that is to retire and get out of our way.
So here's a few of my other things. I was asking myself, okay, when would you want someone with a fixed mindset as opposed to someone with a growth mindset? What can they do that someone can't? And I thought of lots of examples, where you need somebody that's kind of has that iron will that doesn't go with the growth mindset. It's more of a fixed mindset kind of thing. You gave the example of standing up for a moral principle, like, standing up against the Nazis. Like, well, maybe they have some valid points. We should hear them out.
Actually, this is kind of like a thing that I say about. So the 6-month deployment that you talked about that I went to in Afghanistan, I was deployed with the Army, and I noticed very, very stark differences in the way that Army personnel are trained and led than the way we led airmen in the Air Force. Like in the Air Force, we expect airmen to be able to problem solve and diagnose and operate with some degree of freedom. Like, I want to hand you a task and I want you to be able to go off and accomplish it without my direct supervision because that makes you a more valuable asset. In the Army, it was I want you to do this thing in exactly the way that I tell you to. And if you deviate 1 foot away from the path that I set for you, I'm going to hit you so hard that your grandparents are going to wince when they hear about it. But this is the thing, is that's not a bad thing for their circumstances. For the Air Force, we have complicated situations that we expect people to operate within some degree of freedom. If you're an 18-year-old kid right out of basic training and you're working on an F-16's landing gear and you see something out of place, you want that person to have the capability to be like, this doesn't look quite right. Let me kind of break from the norm and bring this up as an issue. On the flip side of the coin, if you're in the Army and you say, charge that hill right now, go, there is no time for the guy to go, well, hang on a second, LT. Is there maybe
Have you thought this through?
Is there a better way we could accomplish this maybe? So it's the end states are different. So they require different mindsets. They require different training regimens. They require different skill sets in the people expected to carry them out.
So I made a list of things I thought were advantages of the fixed mindset over the growth mindset. The one that you bring up is a great one of just being resilient and being able to push through. The way I wrote that down was being better at coping with failure. Like if you have a fixed mindset and you think I am brilliant or I am the best athlete, then when you fail, you blame someone or something else. Like it doesn't get you down that much. Like you keep pressing on because you had a bad day or someone else screwed up or the weather was wrong or something like that, and you just keep going.
Okay. So I'm going to contest you with this because
go ahead.
Because I was so all right. I just had a mental pause because I'm assessing everything I'm about to say and realizing that my wife is going to listen to all of it, and then I'm going to have to hear it back from her perspective, and so this is going to be a problem for me. But I feel like when I was a younger man in the Air Force, I was very fixed mindset. Like I was very confident. I was very cocky. But up until that point in my entire life, I had the skills to back it up. Like I talked a big talk, but for the most part, I was able to walk the walk, right?
Well, you were the valedictorian asterisk.
Bazinga, got me. But anyway, but this is the thing. Like there were times that I failed, and all the times that I failed, it was always in some kind of a conflict with a superior where I felt like I was in the right and they felt like I was doing wrong. And like I was supposed to take their opinions and be like, I need to change my outlook because they're my boss and they are telling me that I am wrong. And I was never good or able to do that at all. And I failed miserably because whenever I would think about like them coming down on me or giving me this thing, the flack or the feedback, I would always externalize it like, well, no, I'm clearly right. And here's all the rationalizations I can come with why they're wrong. So I'm just going to continue the way that I am. And so I experienced continuous, repeated interpersonal failures with superior officers. And most of that was because I was unable to adjust my approach because I always thought I was right. It wasn't until very recently that I started recognizing these mistakes in myself. Like, well, hang on a second. Maybe the common factor in all of these failed relationships was me.
It's my fixed mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
So you gave the example, you did it almost tongue-in-cheek, I think it was 2 episodes ago, of when you came upon a door that was locked, and you were going to pull on that door until it opened.
Exactly. I was a very fixed mindset person as a younger person. I want to... So the way that everything is in this book is you want to be a growth mindset person, not a fixed mindset person.
Right.
So there you go. Like I feel like I was a very fixed mindset, and now... in the present, I feel like I've developed into more of a growth mindset person in certain aspects of my life, but I'm completely incapable. This is the other thing. If you truly are a growth mindset person, then how could you even say that? How am I able to assess myself from the outside and say, yes, I think I exhibit all of these traits perfectly because I'm a growth mindset person?
Yeah, I don't know how you get from one to the other if you're already in one. You're like, well, maybe I'm not inherently valuable and I need you to just try harder.
Well, so this is the thing that I want to bring up about the book that I just recognized last night is if you truly do try to embrace the growth mindset, because as I hate to say it, but as I listen to this book, I'm trying to bring it into my consciousness and think about it as I'm going through different things in my life. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that I'm in a growth mindset. Okay. So it almost paralyzed me with indecision about something because like, how can I even assess my own assessment of what I'm assessing? Because like I've got so many personal biases that I'm filtering all of my decisions through. How can I be sure that they are appropriate biases or if they're just fixed mindset biases? Like, am I fixed mindset?
It kind of gets to that. You know, it's really about what is your motivation for doing a particular thing. It was really clear to me in the section where she was talking about like praising children. Like you don't have to have like a script for how you're going to praise them. You have to ask like, what is the message behind any particular praise that I give for them? And is that fixed mindset or is that growth mindset?
Yes. And I think that's easier because that is you trying to alter somebody else's mindset. Like it's external. And you can assess them objectively because they're you. I cannot assess myself objectively because I can't. I'm literally the subject. So any assessment of myself is going to be completely subjective.
Yeah. Well, so in the list of advantages of the growth mindset, I recalled recently I had rewatched the film Adjustment Bureau with Matt Damon and Emily Blunt. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I like that movie.
Yeah, me too. So, and I had this in mind, and I realized that a lot of the concepts from this book were in that movie. So Matt Damon is like this up-and-coming political character that's he's like a young senator from the state of New York that's on trajectory to be the next candidate for president of the United States. And in the early course of the film, it becomes apparent that there's this secret society of people that are swirling around him and subtly adjusting the things in his life to keep him on that track. Like someone has a master plan that the end result is him being president, and they have a vested interest in that, so they're doing little subtle things in his life to make that outcome happen. And there's this key scene right at the beginning where he meets his main antagonist, Emily Blunt's character, where she comes in and he meets her in the men's bathroom when he just lost an election and he's got to go back out and give his consolation speech. And it turns out later on in the film that they sent her into this bathroom so he would have this experience with her that would invigorate him and make him go out on the stage and give this inspirational concession speech that would turn his failure into a win and send him rocketing to the presidency. Is that the way you remember it?
Yes, it was the idea that, kind of like the butterfly effect, is that we have this master plan and we have it all strung out, and here are the critical points that we need to give him this little bit of nudge to keep him on track. Yeah,
but there's something very specific they said that relates very much to this book, and that is once he realized that there were people interfering with him, and they decided that she only needed to be in his life to help him give that speech, and then he should never see her again. But he fell in love with her in that moment and decided that he did want to see her again, so he was fighting them. They were trying to keep him away from her, and he was trying to get back to her, and him and her were trying to get together again, and that was the central point of tension in the movie. But at one point, the adjusters say to him, "We can't let you get back together with her, because if you do, you'll stop pushing and trying so hard." And they infer that he has like this grudge, this bone to pick where he's trying to prove himself. And that if he were to fall in love with a girl and be satisfied with his romantic life, it would do away with this psychological feeling he had of not pleasing his father that was driving him to succeed, and he wouldn't push anymore.
Yes, in a very fixed mindset way. He was trying to fill this void in his life, and that was going to drive him to do great things. Which is a whole other concept of do the ends justify the means kind of question, but that's not what we're looking at right now. What we're looking at is like you were talking about, that fixed mindset drove him to greatness. Just like in the book, she gives all the negative examples, like you were talking about, complaining that they're ridiculously successful outliers. Like she keeps talking about John McEnroe, like he's like, this is
dirted exactly on John McEnroe so much.
This is exactly the kind of thing you don't want to be. Oh, I don't want to be like an all-star, like super rich tennis star? Yeah. Is this what you're telling me?
John McEnroe won 7 Grand Slams. He has 4 world records that stand to this day.
Yeah,
and
but
he
that's
stopped playing in the early 80s.
But no, Ben, if you go out on the tennis court and you're just trying your best every single time, that makes you a real winner. Like she keeps talking about how consolation prizes and participation ribbons are such a problem for children, but she's saying exactly that thing. It's like, oh, well, you don't have to be a champion, and you shouldn't push to be a champion. You should just try to do better.
So my conclusion that I drew here is that there are times where it's superior to have a fixed mindset because you're more resilient to failure, and you just have like a stronger drive to succeed than someone who's in the growth mindset.
You could. I would very much caveat that with, you could. It could drive you to be all these better things. Harnessed in the right way. Like harness your powers for good, not evil kind of thing.
So the converse was my question, what are the disadvantages of the growth mindset? So that goes back to the commencement address. Like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. It isn't always right. Like, sometimes that's bad advice.
Sometimes that is just genuinely bad advice. And that feeds back into exactly the opposite thing that she was telling us to do with raising our kids. It's like sometimes you just need to let the kid know, hey, like, oh, I want to be, like my son saying to me, like, I want to be a professional YouTuber. I'm like, that's incredibly low probability that will ever work out. So we're going to continue to get a well-rounded education just in case.
So what's the difference between just realism or fixed mindset? You know, are you having a fixed mindset and you're preventing your son from having a growth mindset, or are you just being a good parent?
Right? Who knows? Like, when you're parenting and you feel like you're doing it right, like, clearly you're not. Like, you're missing something. So who knows? Like, this is something that my wife and I have talked about in the past, though. So I heard it was a psychology professor, years and years ago, when I was taking my intro to psychology course at the academy. It was mandatory. I would never have picked it, and it turned out to be one of the more interesting classes I ever took. And he said with his kids that he would always encourage them and praise them for their effort and not their ability, because he wanted them to value the effort and not value the ability.
So she said something right, I think in like the introductory chapter, that I found really revealing, and I liked it as much the second time as the first time. She talked about the story of the tortoise and the hare and how it's an example of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. That the tortoise, you know, the proverbial story of the tortoise and the hare, where the hare has the most natural ability, but the tortoise wins the race because he keeps trying. She didn't ever give examples like that of somebody that had a lot of ability but failed. She picked people that had a lot of ability and were quite successful as her example, bad examples of fixed mindset. But anyway, here's the phrase. I wrote it down exactly as she said it, and I think I wrote it down the first time too. As a child, did you imagine yourself as the tortoise or just a less foolish hare?
Yeah. And that leapt out at me too when she said it, because she's absolutely right. Like, I've never thought twice about that story, but listening to it as a kid, even as an adult, you always, the lesson is not, oh, well, the tortoise was steady and he did such a great plotting job. No, you're always thinking the rabbit was an idiot.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We don't take the growth mindset away from that story. We don't go, I want to be I want to be the tortoise. I want to be the slow guy that wins the race because the other guy just messed up his chance when he should have beat me. No, you don't think of yourself as the tortoise. You think of yourself as a hare. I want to be the one with all the natural ability and be focused.
Yes, I'm going to take both. I'm going to make them into some super fast tortoise. Like, because nobody wants to be the tortoise ever. Because if you extrapolate that story at all, like, he loses every other race to every other hare. Like, that was the bottom of the bell curve hare that he raced.
Right. We examined this outlier story as if it's supposed to be an example of every race between a turtle and a rabbit.
And it's absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
There is, I'll tell you right now, every other rabbit that races him takes it super seriously. Like, they are focused in the blocks. They did stretches before, and they get like their personal best on that 500-meter dash, regardless of how fast the tortoise is going.
Yeah, because the first rabbit's never going to live it down, but everybody else isn't going to make the same mistake.
Exactly.
So that's another thing I wrote down in the column of one of the disadvantages of the growth mindset. It's this idea of you might not be naturally beautiful or smart or talented, but you can try really hard. Like, that isn't that motivating sometimes. Like, I don't think that's a good thing to say. And there's been it's been too long to call it a trend, but in commencement addresses to not say that. Like, you know what? You can't be whatever you want to be. Find out what you're good at and do that. And that's a little bit fixed mindset-y, but you can do it in a growth mindset way.
Well, and this is the thing that she never talks about, is she keeps referring to as like it's a complete black and white thing. There is no spectrum of this. Either your growth mindset you can develop.
Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. The way that she phrases it is that there is no upper bound, that there is no upper limit on the amount of skill or ability that you can acquire through sheer raw effort and determination. And that is such BS. Like, it's such a lie. We cannot perpetuate that. I don't care how hard you work or how many hours you put in. If you're 4'7", you will never play professional basketball. Period. That's the end of it.
Right.
If if your brain just does not calculate numbers the way that other people's do, you're not going to be a NASA engineer. Like, so
right. If you're naturally tone deaf, you're not going to be a professional singer, and on and on and on.
Yeah, this brings me to kind of my point. Like, this is my bias, putting an asterisk on everything she said when I was listening to this book, is that my personal belief is that while our entire persona and consciousness is not predetermined by genetics, I do believe that genetics kind of sets our boundaries. It kind of sets like our upper and lower limits.
Yeah.
Like physically.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, like, yes, you can absolutely develop your critical thinking, management, and like just pure math skills through education, through training, and through due diligence and practice. But I firmly believe that there is an upper bound to that. Like, you can't just work super hard and become a world-famous mathematician. That's just not how it works.
And I'd classify what you said a little bit differently. Gladwell expresses it pretty good in Outliers, where he talks about there being a threshold. Like, if you want to be in the NBA, you don't have to be the tallest guy, but you got to be at least this tall. And if you're at least that tall, then you can probably make it if you try really hard. And, you don't have to have the highest IQ in the room in order to be a mathematician, but you got to have at least this level. And if you have that much and you work real hard, you can probably make it.
That's a much better way of putting it. But yeah, there is, like, as much as we want to tell ourselves that you can do anything and be anything, it's just not reality. And we're doing a disservice to our kids by trying to perpetuate that.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it's a trend. You can go on the internet and watch commencement addresses that have gone viral recently for that exact reason. That is, they're actually bucking the trend of just telling everyone you can be whatever you want to be. So, like you said, she likes to dirt a lot on John McEnroe, but I looked him up and he was hugely successful. But she's right; he was very much steeped in the fixed mindset. You talked about this in the episode when we talked about the Air Force Academy. What did they say to you from the moment you get there?
Yeah, you're the best of the best.
You're the best of the best. That's right. It's a very much a fixed mindset kind of approach to things. And if you fail, it's because you weren't living up to your potential. And if you succeed, that was what was expected because you were already proven to be the best.
Yeah. Exactly. And like you were talking about, there are times when having a fixed mindset is better than having a growth mindset. Like, if you're getting reamed at work, sometimes the appropriate response is not, "Oh, sorry, boss, but I'll do better next time. I really learned from this experience." Like, sometimes you're just going to get fired.
Yeah, you're right.
The guy, like the Secretary of the Air Force didn't go to the president when live nuclear ordnance flew across the United States and like, "Well, boss, you're right. We screwed up, but I'll tell you what, boy, howdy, did we have some lessons learned. We're going to try harder
next time.
I've got so many new TPTs that we're going to implement. It's going to be great. That's wonderful. You're fired."
No, yeah. Everybody got fired. Chief got fired. Secretary got fired. The wing commander got fired. Everybody got fired. And then inspections were a nightmare for the next 5 years until we moved on to something new.
I can only imagine.
Okay, so I was thinking, so she was kind of going through at the beginning these general examples. She gave John McEnroe as an example of a fixed mindset. As much as she wanted dirt on him for having a fixed mindset, and he did, he was very, very successful. Like, he believed that he was the best, and a lot of times that drove him to succeed. He never won the Australian Open, and he never won the French Open. And he probably told himself he's just not good at playing on clay. And that's why he could never win the French Open. And maybe if he had more of a growth mindset, maybe he could have, expanded his game and won the French Open. I don't know. But he won Wimbledon and the U.S. Open a ton of times.
This kind of reminds me of a scene from the late episode of Scrubs in like season 9 or 10 when they tried to transition to new characters. Like, it was terrible failure, and those seasons are bad. But there's a couple of gems, and one of them was there was a kid who was a med student, and he was just super lazy, and Dr. Cox didn't like him, and he couldn't figure out why. And he realized at the end, he's like, "I don't like you because you're lazy." And the kid looks at him and goes, "Am I a bad doctor?" And he goes, "You're doing better than most." And he goes, "Better than most is fine with me." And so sometimes you just, you just assess where you are, and if you're happy there, why do I need to be in a growth mindset?
So you mentioned that there's a spectrum of these things, rather than it being binary, rather than you having the on 100% fixed mindset or the off 100% growth mindset binary it's more of a spectrum, like more towards one side or the other, or maybe in different contexts. So I was thinking about this from the perspective of people who have the mindset applied unevenly. Maybe in aspects of their life they have like someone who's highly successful in their business life, but who has like a failed marriage, or they're on their fourth marriage, or they're overweight or whatever.
Let me be so bold as to venture that you, sir, exhibit this duality quite well, because you are a wonderful person who is always looking for ways to improve and to expand your boundaries. But at the same time, you, sir, are closed and shut off and completely, nope, this is the truth. This book contains the word, and that's it, period, dot, and we're done. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. This book that she's saying, like, that tells you, like, oh, well, you have a fixed mindset. You should really open your mind to other possibilities. But no, there are some times and some things where you need to stand your ground. Like, this is what I think is right.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you're talking about like my religious belief, that's the foundation of my moral code and my parenting philosophy and my way I approach my life, I'm very much fixed about that, as opposed to other things where I kind of take a growth mindset. So I was thinking about how this influenced me when I was in college, where, after just my first 2 semesters, I'd already had my first child. And so I was going to school and working a full-time job and those kinds of things to try to get through school. And there were times where I kind of had to prioritize my grades and my job and my family, and I couldn't just apply the growth mindset all the way to one of those things because it came at the expense of the others.
Oh, come on, man, that's not true. You could have just turned that dial up from 11 to 12 and like gotten perfect scores across the board and just never slept.
Yeah, exactly. And then what happened? I die in a car wreck on the way home from school, even though I'm getting perfect grades or whatever. Like, great.
Oh, that would have been the best funeral speech ever, though. It's like, oh yeah, he died untimely, but I'll tell you what, he was killing it right before he died.
So I want to talk about a character that's an example of this from my favorite film, Groundhog Day. So Phil Connors, the weatherman, starts off the film very much in the fixed mindset. He goes to Punxsutawney and he thinks he's the greatest. He calls himself the talent. And that is right out of the playbook of someone in the fixed mindset. He thinks that he's valuable and that the station he's at just doesn't understand him, and he's going to go to a big network and he's going to be found and validated. And it illustrates this really well in the series as his character develops over the course of the film, where he broadcasts the groundhog ceremony there in the town square. And for about the first 4 iterations of that, he says almost the exact same phrase every time. Like, he's not thinking about it. He's not trying to get better. He thinks he's already as brilliant as possible to do that. And later on towards the end of the film is his character transitions from being in the fixed mindset to being in the growth mindset, where he's practicing piano and he's learning to carve ice sculptures and he's trying to help out other people. You can also see that his the words that he uses when he does the broadcast in the town square are changing. He's getting better as he transforms into the growth mindset.
It's funny because the author touched on the movie Groundhog Day and Bill Murray's character in it. And I thought, as soon as she said that, I'm like, oh, we're going to be talking about Groundhog Day on the podcast again. But you're absolutely right. And like, he does exhibit a transition from fixed to growth mindset in the film. But this book would have you, again, reinforcing the idea that fixed is bad and growth is good. And I think through our discussion here, we're both kind of similar mind, where fixed isn't always bad and growth isn't always good.
Yes. So I got a challenge for you. Talk about the characters in The Matrix.
The Matrix?
What mindset? The Matrix.
What? That's a really random movie to bring up with this mindset thing. And I'm asking you this question and making that statement to buy time as I chug this problem in my brain.
Okay. All right. So I'll give you. So Trinity and Morpheus. Would you agree that they both have a fixed mindset?
So, all right, you're going to make me nerd so hard, Ben, because this movie is an example of, like, they deliberately built those characters to kind of reinforce the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. Because both of those characters do the things they do, make the decisions that they make, because they received information at beforehand, before the movie was even filmed, like off camera, that they were going to do and achieve certain things. And all of their actions after that are informed by the fact that they're going to do those things. And so it just reinforces their idea that this is the track that I'm taking and I'm doing it right. But they already know that they were going to succeed when it started. So of course they're in the fixed mindset.
Yes, and right up until the very end, when Neo looks like he's failing, and he's like, "See, I wasn't the one," and stuff like that. The fact that Trinity is in the fixed mindset keeps them propelling towards a successful outcome, and it wouldn't have been possible if she hadn't been in the fixed mindset. If she'd been like, you know what, maybe the Oracle was right. Maybe you're not the one.
And so this goes back to the idea that, like she was saying, if you're in the fixed mindset and you experience failure, you give up and you flee from it, which I don't think is the case. Like if you're in a fixed mindset, I don't think so either.
I think it makes them more resilient.
Oh, absolutely. And then again, we're both kind of type A people. We're both in the military. Like maybe other people handle failure differently. But I know even when as a younger person I was in the fixed mindset and I experienced failure, again, I just grabbed that door handle and started pulling increasingly harder because I'm confident that this door will fail before I give up. And so that's how I dealt with failure.
Yeah. So did Neo have a fixed mindset or did he have a growth mindset?
Oh, Neo absolutely had a fixed mindset for 98% of that movie. Like, he went to the Oracle, and, like, she just told him exactly, and that was the whole shtick of the Oracle, right? Oh, she just told you exactly what you needed to hear. And she told him, like, oh, yeah, you're not the one. Totally not the guy. And he just kept going about, like, see, I told you guys. Like, why don't you believe me? And then at the end, he was forced to grow, or else he was going to lose, like, his mentor and the person he loved, and all of the feelings happened. But he only happened because he thought that he was expendable. Like, he thought that he was not the person, so he put himself in ridiculous levels of danger for the person that he thought was more important than him. So, very, very much a fixed mindset, right up until the point that he came back from the dead. Like, that's the first moment in the movie where you see the light, the switch flick in his head, like, oh, hey, maybe I could be more than I think I am.
So with both of those characters, Phil Connors in Groundhog Day and Neo in The Matrix, it's like the plot was set up to show them transforming from someone with a fixed mindset to someone with a growth mindset. But reaping benefits from both sides, I would think.
Well, and this goes back to the whole point of it's impossible to distill a person down to one character trait. Because we're all snowflakes, Ben. We're all multifaceted, unique individuals that are everything that we do is informed by everything that we have done before to this moment. And you can't just point at one tiny portion of the brain and say, oh, this is this, therefore it is good or therefore it is bad. That is completely, again, a problem that I have with psychology textbooks.
So I agree with you, and you gave a great example of me where one aspect of my life I'm very much fixed mindset and others I'm growth mindset in. And sometimes I'm kind of painfully aware of the ones where I have a fixed mindset and I should be more growth mindset, and sometimes I think there's value to having a fixed mindset. So I was thinking about a couple of personal examples from my past. She gave a few in the book in the context of sports of people who were able to achieve like world records or personal bests when they couldn't see the clock. And that's a growth mindset thing to do. When you aren't thinking, oh, the fastest I can go is this, and if you don't know how fast you're going, you can actually exceed that. My son jokes that in the movie, the Disney Pixar movie Cars, it doesn't matter like how much traction they have or how much horsepower their engine generates. It's just how much they believe in themselves is how fast they can go.
Well, are we going to talk about the mechanical engineering impossibilities that is the movie Cars? Who made all these cars? Why do they have steering wheels? There are so many unanswered questions. The
Why
forklifts.
Did you go up on that tangent?
The forklifts are the only thing in the entire universe of cars that can actually do anything. How are they not like the master race? How are they not ruling over all the other? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want parts? Were you going to install those parts yourself? No, you got to come to me. So you're going to pay. It's all right. No, I'm putting this on the discussion
on this. I was pondering
for next time, episode, sir. Is we're talking universe. Cars and airplanes and Bad at Magic and how none of it makes any sense, and we're gonna boil that sucker down to its bones, sir.
Yeah. So I was pondering back on my past and examples of people that had a fixed or a growth mindset, and I can never get past my 6th grade teacher, John Holt. He was as inspirational a person as I've ever had in my life. He was a retired United States Marine Corps sergeant, and I don't actually know how tall he is, but he's Paul Bunyan in my mind. Like, he was like 6'4" or something like that, and just had this big barrel chest and gruff voice. And this was in Oklahoma at the time when corporal punishment was allowed. And he had a paddle up on the wall, and it stenciled on it. It said, "Pain is good." And we had never seen him use the paddle, but we knew if he did, someone was going to die. And no one doubted that he would if he would need to. And I remember from the moment I set foot in his class, everything was growth mindset. Anyone could succeed. Everything he did. He always had he was always recruiting for the wrestling club, and he was always trying to get people to do things, get stronger. And like, he would just make people do push-ups for no reason, random out of nowhere, not as like a punishment, but just because you got a few free minutes, why not get stronger? He taught us our times tables so well. I remember reaching the point where we were proud of the fact that we were late to recess because our class was staying late to study times tables. And we would go out on the playground, the other kids would say, "What took you guys so long? Why were you late to recess?" And we were like, "We were doing our times tables, but we're better at them than you." Like, he was the epitome of growth mindset. And I took pride in doing it. I remember I missed an assignment once, and he put me in John Holt's Zeros Club. He called it Zeros Club, and he gave me this worksheet. Every day I had to take home and sign at the top and have my mom sign that she'd seen my homework, and then he had to sign that he'd seen it, and it was really embarrassing and stuff. But it made me feel like he cared even when I wasn't giving my full effort, because it's like he felt I could succeed if he just held me accountable.
This is an excellent thing that you brought up that we should touch on, because this is a huge thing for parenting, and that is the motivating factor that is pride. And this book would have you believe that you shouldn't instill pride in your children, or that
I would agree with that. I think she was like, never praise your children. Never. She even told you not to at one point.
Right. And she's always talking about like, oh, well, the effort. And like, there was one, she kept giving these examples like, oh, like I did the homework in record time and I got everything right. And then
I wrote that one down.
Yeah. And the appropriate response from her perspective is, oh, well, I'm sorry that you weren't challenged enough. Let's see if we can help you grow.
Yeah, I wrote it down. She said, should we praise if children get their assignment done fast and do it perfectly, should we praise them for being fast or perfect? No. Instead, we should say, whoops, I guess we need to give you something more challenging.
But so, at least for me, I might swing a little too far on the pride side, but I was raised on pride. I was raised on, like, if you work hard and you do these things that you're supposed to do, then you will be better than your peers and the other people around you. And like, yes, looking back, like, that's not the most positive message, but I'll tell you what, it was a heck of a motivator. Like, I was the valedictorian asterisk at my high school, largely because I was motivated to be better than other people, because I wanted that feeling of pride in myself. I loved, and this is going to sound so bad, but I loved walking around and just looking at people and going, I'm better than all of these people. And you know what, Ben?
But that's what I was talking about. That's one of the advantages of the fixed mindset. It's a validation of being the best.
Yes, I still think this way sometimes. Like, I get done. I ran 5 miles the other day, and I remember finishing and like, man, that sucked. But I'll tell you what, there's not a whole lot of people that can do what I just did. And like, I just take pride in that. And so pride,
it's inherently more motivating than the growth mindset.
But pop culture and this book and so many other sources will have us believe that pride is a bad thing, that we shouldn't like raise our kids or make them feel like they are superior. We should all everybody should be like the level playing field. And like, while I understand that to a degree, like, we should all be treated equally, we should all have equal opportunities, which don't exist because of multiple factors, I don't think everybody is necessarily equal. There are some people that are capable of putting in more effort in one place, and some people that are naturally talented in others. And there's always going to be people that are at the head of the pack, and there's always going to be people that are at the back for whatever reason. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
When you have an opportunity to praise one of your children, do you find yourself kind of weighing this thing? Like, are you like, oh, I don't want to just praise them for being brilliant, I want to praise them for working hard? Or
that's the thing. I do try to follow what my my professor back at the college said, because I believe that firmly. I want my children to appreciate their effort, not necessarily their ability, because you can't always fall back on ability, but you can always put in more effort. But at the same time, I don't withhold praise for my children if they do something well. I don't say like, oh, well, I'm sorry, that wasn't challenging enough. I say, hey, good job, kid. High five. You must have worked really hard on that.
You did that perfectly, and you did it really fast.
Yeah, you must have worked really hard on it. That's. I try to say that phrase over and over again.
Yeah. So I've found that there's a risk here that I remember from my childhood. I don't know if you had this problem where you would get praise for something you did, and it was actually really easy for you. And the praise kind of had a negative effect on you. Like if you did something and you did the assignment perfectly and you did it in a really short amount of time, and they say, oh, that must have been so hard for you. And you're thinking inside, that wasn't hard at all.
Oh, no, Ben. I love those opportunities.
See, but I worry about this with my kids because I don't want to praise them for their effort if I'm wrong. Like, because then the message I'm sending is that you can basically phone it in and still be excellent.
Well, this is why, as a parent, you need to have a follow-up. Because from my perspective, as a kid, like, if he was like, oh, wow, you did a really good job on this. This must have been tough. Like, actually, it was super easy. And they mic drop on you. Then your response as the parent is like, oh, well, I actually then need to reevaluate my opinion of what you're capable of and crank up the difficulty a couple more notches.
That's a really good way to approach that. But sometimes you don't always get that mic drop feedback. Like they just kind of take the praise and write it down, and then you just failed as a parent.
Well, but then it feeds back into the idea that if they're consistently performing above expectations, you need to adjust expectations.
Yeah.
Like I remember, I got a report card one time that had like a C on it, I think, from middle school, and I will never forget. My parents called me into the office, like the office in our house. We had a big desk, and like my dad was sitting down at the desk with his
so fixed mindset-y.
Oh, he had his elbows on the desk with his hands
Josh,
together.
you are not living up to your potential.
And my mom was standing behind him with her arms crossed, and I was like seated in a seat that they put there in the middle of the room, away from everything, in front of the desk, and I had that like.
Dude, you are textbook fixed mindset.
This is unacceptable. Like this C, no. You will have straight A's forever.
Okay, so let's imagine an alternate universe where Josh has like hippie parents that just whatever you do is acceptable. Do you get straight A's?
No, absolutely not. Listen, Ben, I am a firm believer in this. If I did not have the military structure that I had in college, I'd have failed out in the first semester because I am an inherently lazy person, and I relied on my intelligence way too hard. Like, I got grades that I should not have gotten in college because I was like, I kind of got it. I'll figure it out. And that was the first time when it was starting to push the threshold of my understanding of things. And my grades started slipping pretty hard in my junior and senior year.
So you gave the example of middle school, when you got a C in middle school. Back in 2003, I was a middle school teacher. I was just starting, and I was kind of getting initiated, and I got a few of the things that I expected a little bit. Like when I got to the classroom, the way I got hired, I kind of came in the middle of the year, and the other teachers, I think in an effort to be helpful, said to me something to the effect of, hey, do you want to know about your students? I can tell you about who your trouble kids are. And that felt very fixed mindset-y to me, and it didn't just feel, I hadn't read this book yet, but I kind of rejected the idea. Like, no thanks, I'll figure it out for myself. Like, I don't want to go into this with preconceived notions about who's going to be good and who's going to be bad.
Yeah, but this feeds back to, she talked about that stand and deliver a couple of times where teachers.
Jaime Escalante
going in there.
He went into this, this impoverished school in South Central LA and turned him into state best in math and calculus.
I love how he gets in that kid's face like, I can multiply by nines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at that, 54.
Yeah,
that's
the one.
That's a great scene.
Stand and deliver. Classic movie.
Here's the thing about being a teacher in those situations, because she did bring up several teachers that take these kids that nobody wants, everybody thinks they're deficient, and like just turns them around. What she doesn't talk about, like she says like, oh, that's the growth mindset that fixed them. And you know what? It probably is. What she doesn't talk about is the monumental amount of freaking effort that it took to turn those kids around. And like, if you're a teacher, teachers don't get paid enough to do what they do. Like, teachers don't get paid enough to phone it in. Like, people that go above and beyond the call of duty to really influence and bring these kids up out of what everyone thinks is their preconceived position are amazing heroes. But honestly, if you're there if this is your job and you're doing this year after year after year and you put in this monumental effort and turn a couple kids around and really make a difference, and then next year they all leave and you get a whole new batch, that would wear you down after a while.
A little bit, but there is an element of he developed a bit of a reputation and a cachet, and the kids come in with higher fixed mindset that I'm going into Jaime Escalante's class. He's famous because he takes kids in this school and turns them into world-class mathematicians. And, you would benefit from that. It would be residual.
So, yeah, okay. But the residuals you're talking there, we're on the order of 3 and 4%, okay? We're not talking like somebody's going to come in and be like, oh, my job's basically done because I've got such a bad rep as a teacher. Like, that's not a thing.
So part of this is what I wrote my master's thesis about, and it was about the impact of the No Child Left Behind Act on extracurriculars and gifted and talented education, because basically the premise of the No Child Left Behind Act is that we're going to have a growth mindset, and we're going to say that every child in school can achieve a certain minimum threshold. But if you take a standard population, they're on a bell curve, and if you're saying that you're going to set a cut line and that every person in the population is going to occur above the cut line, the amount of effort you have to spend on that last, standard deviation is humongous.
Yes.
And it has to come from somewhere.
And it's going to come from the guys at the other end of the bell curve. You know what? They're fine.
Exactly.
They're fine.
That's what I wrote my thesis about.
I'm going to spend my time over here, and it's going to push everybody to the middle.
Yep. And that's what happens. So I took over teaching middle school, and I made that decision that I wasn't going to have them tell me. And just like I thought, before long, I figured out who my brilliant kids were and who my trouble kids were. And I feel like I made a difference in a few of their lives. Some of them still reach out to me today. In fact, right here on the wall in front of me is an artwork that one of my middle schoolers did. I'll put a photo in the show notes.
That's weird. Hang on a second. This is an artwork that a middle schooler did when they were in middle school, right? And then you
No, he did later on in life. He has a band and he became an artist, and I bought one of his pieces that he did.
Okay, so in my mind, so first of all, you bought it, so that's a whole different thing. But in my mind, I'm imagining that, when you said this whole thing initially, I thought you got a letter in the mail, and it's like, hey, Mr. Rich, remember me? I'm 45 now. Look at my finger painting. And, just... a
little stick figure.
Yeah, something
says
awful.
Mr. Rich, and we're holding hands.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I imagined.
It's legitimate piece of art that belongs on my walls, and it was done by one of my former students.
And the fact that you bought it because of course you did. You've been rich. You tracked this guy down, cyberstalked him out of nowhere, found he had an art gallery, and bought one of his pieces of art. Of course. Okay, sorry, moving on.
Your version of the story is way more interesting than what actually happened, so I'm not going to correct the facts on that. So, my second year teaching, there had become... anyway, during my first couple of years of teaching, there became a vacancy in one of the extracurriculars after school. It was it was called Junior Varsity Quiz. It was basically Team Jeopardy.
Quiz Bowl.
Where you have... Quiz Bowl. So the Quiz Bowl team, the coach retired or moved to another school or whatever, and they're like, hey, we need somebody to volunteer. And I'd done that back in school and enjoyed it, and I said, sure, I'll do it. So I volunteered to be the coach of the Quiz Bowl team. And there's an interesting dynamic you have as a teacher because, in the course of practicing for Quiz Bowl, you're not really in the discipline of giving kids factual information that they're going to use to answer the questions. There isn't time in the actual Quiz Bowl practices for that. Whatever they bring with them that they've learned in their other subjects and books they've read and history they know and facts, math that they can do, that's already in their heads.
Yeah,
what I'm teaching them...
Yeah, you're teaching them test-taking strategies. You're teaching them
yes.
how to quickly arrive at an answer or how to stall for that 4 seconds that you need to come up with the right words.
Exactly. All those things. That's what I was doing. And I knew enough about it and stuff. And the school I was at was 8 years old or something like that, and they'd never won anything. That in the gym, they had no banners hanging in the rafters of any sports or anything like that. So if you were starting this with the fixed mindset, I was very much Jaime Escalante. I'm at a losing school with a bunch of losing kids, and we're never going anywhere.
Are you Jaime Escalante? Did you turn this quiz bowl around? Did you go to the national champs, Ben? Tell me this story.
So, over the course of the season, we start having these weekly, home or away events where a team comes in. You sit down with the 5 kids at the buzzers and you ask them. And the way the tournament the way a round plays out is that I think there's 2 halves and a speed round, and there's like 12 questions in each half, and they're each worth 10 points, and then they get worth more towards the end. Anyway, at the end, a typical winning score is somewhere around 200, and then but all the ones that happen during the season are just kind of warm-ups. It doesn't really count until you get to the tournament at the end of the season. So over the course of the season, and I was teaching middle school, so we had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I had kids that came from each grade, but there's no distinguishing factor among the kids to say this is just the 8th graders or this is just the 7th graders. It's just middle school quiz team. So I could have a 6th grader on the team, but the odds that they're going to be smart enough to stand up against the best 8th graders isn't good.
If you have a 6th grader on the team, it's because there's some weird savant.
Right. So, but the number of kids I had come out was low enough that I wanted everybody to get playing time. So I was like a coach, I didn't have a varsity team and a junior varsity team. Everybody was on the team, and with 5 and having 2 halves, I could usually rotate all my regular players through so that they all got some minutes playing. I had 2, really brilliant 8th graders that pretty much stayed in the whole game, but the others I kind of rotated through to keep. And I had 2 little 6th graders that came to every single practice. Like, they never missed a practice. They were there from the beginning till the end. They tried real hard, and they were going to be great once they got to 8th grade, but they weren't yet.
Right.
One of them was this cute little girl, and she hadn't even gone through puberty yet. Just sweet little thing, just lovely, tiny little wisp of a girl. It just looked very different than the big old 8th graders. And she mostly just sat there and looked mousy and stared at her buzzer and never buzzed in. So we get to the end of the season and we have the tournament. And up to this point, it hadn't really been spectatory, as in we just traded schools, but there was no one else in the room besides the students and the judges. But this big tournament all happened in one day, and I think each team would play like 5 rounds. At the end of the day, the 2 teams with the best record were then the finalists and would go on to compete against each other in the televised event on public broadcasting.
Ooh, high stakes.
Yeah, so this is in Clark County, Nevada. So this is in Las Vegas, and the finale was you got to go and be televised for the final. So we were going into the 3rd round. We were undefeated, and we came up against one of the most well-known teams that had banners hanging in their rafters of having succeeded in the past. And after the half...
Did they all wear ascots and stuff in like their school uniforms?
Yes.
Like,
everything
fancy?
you imagine, yes. We show up in our scrappy, just whatever everyone happened to wear that day, and they're all wearing ascots.
Did they talk a bunch of trash right before it started? Like, oh, how did you even get here? Did you have to ride your bikes?
Everything you're imagining, like Billy Madison and Spider-Man Homecoming, everything. All those things. So we're in there, and I'm giving it my best. And this little 6th grader that was on my team, I'll call her Cindy Luhu, she came along, and her whole family came. Like, her grandmother came, and her aunt came, and they're all following her around and watching her sit there and stare at her buzzer with this mousy little look on her face and not doing anything. So we come to the half, and we're just getting our butts kicked. Just completely getting our butts kicked. We're down by 70 points at the half, which is more than we typically score in a half. So it's almost insurmountable. And so after the half, I kind of look around, and I see, her whole family came. They're here to see her play, and we're going to lose anyway. So I'll just put her in, give her a chance to, get in and stuff like that.
Rudy,
so she sits down.
Rudy.
Yeah. First question of the half, they ask something. I want to say that the question was, who's the name of the fairy in the Disney logo?
Tinkerbell.
Something like that. And we hear the buzzer, and everyone looks around to see who's buzzing in. Of course, no one looks at Cindy Lou Who, because why would she be the one to buzz in?
Pretty sure hers isn't even plugged in.
Yeah. And there it is. Her buzzer is lit up. And everyone kind of holds their breath, and her family's, sitting on the edge of her chairs, and everyone turns and looks at Cindy Lou Who, and she goes, Tinkerbell? And the judge goes, that's correct. And our team, it was like NBA Jam when you make 3 shots in a row. We were on fire. After that, we ran off like 10 questions in a row where the other team didn't even buzz in, and we won by like 3 questions at the end of the round. And then we won the next round, and we had the highest record, and we qualified for the finals. So my principal was in the room, and he saw all of this. And the other team that qualified that we were going to play against on TV was his rival school. He was a vice principal at that school when he got selected to be a principal, so he came to our school. So he decided his old school was his rival school.
Truth is stranger than fiction. Please continue.
Okay, so in the finals, we go to the television studio, and now, for the mechanics of TV, they decide their set only has 4 seats for players on each team instead of 5. So I have all my team that's...
Oh, you should have thrown... No, you throw a chair. Like, this is unacceptable. These are not standard quiz bowl requirements. How dare you? Question the sanctity.
I need to pull a Bobby Knight.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of fixed mentality. So, I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. We only got 4 seats. My kids have worked for this all season. They worked their butts off. No one thought they could do it, and yet here we are in the finals, and not all my kids are going to be able to make it on TV. And it's like right out of a made-for-TV movie. My principal says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Yeah," and he pulls me aside. He says, "Listen, I know what you've been trying to do with I know what you've been trying to do with these kids, and it's admirable, but we're playing against a rival school here, and this is on TV, and I don't want you to mess this up. So only play the good kids."
Hang on, and then pan to Coach Rich, like with a serious expression on his face, and he gets more stern as the time goes on, and the music swells, and he says, "No, Vice Principal, that's not how I run my team. You got to believe in my kids out there. We're gonna make this happen." And like gives this rousing speech, and then it just goes into the montage of winning at the end by a nose.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to tell you where my heart was at in this moment. And my heart was, it doesn't matter who wins or loses this competition. These kids have worked, they're proud to be here, and their grandma just wants to see them on TV. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me, that was winning, was just getting every kid in front of the camera.
Definitely, yes, absolutely.
So that was my objective. So I didn't want to take on the principal, like you said, so I didn't give that speech. But I also didn't agree to what he'd said. I think I said something non-committal like, "Well, we'll see."
Okay, now, Ben, storytelling 101, sir. Like, it doesn't matter what you actually said. What you said was, "That's not how I run my team," and then you kicked dirt on his shoe, and then he stormed off.
Well, I've never asked him about this experience, but I'd like to. So we went through the tournament, and it was close, but it was hard fought. And my stars, this one girl I have was Australian, and she had like that. She was like, speaking of Lindsay Lohan, she was like Lindsay Lohan's character from Mean Girls, where like she had these hippie parents that moved her all around the world, and she just knew everything. Yeah, it was like that.
Okay.
So she was the star. Like, she won the thing almost single-handedly. But I was able to rotate all of my dedicated core team players that had come to every practice through so that they got some time on television. And we won. I would have been happy if we lost, but we won.
Oh, and they sprayed you down with all the apple juice or whatever they had.
And I had this moment where afterwards I kind of looked over at the principal, and we had that moment of eye contact where he knew I hadn't listened to what he said, but he knew that it turned out okay anyway. And it was very satisfying.
All right, so I can't even with you. I can't even with you, Ben. Like, at one point during this conversation, I thought to myself, Ben's life needs to be a movie. And then I thought, no, that wouldn't freaking work, because it would be this disjointed, like, collage of vignettes doing all these random crazy things that make no sense being together on film. So your life is like the TV show Quantum Leap, where every episode is something completely different.
Adventure.
It's just some weird random...
Yeah. So
that
was the time I coached the Bob Miller Middle School Bobcats to their first ever district championship in Clark County, Nevada in junior varsity quiz.
On this podcast, you have been the Jaime Escalante of this Nevada public school for the Quiz Bowl team, a black market Italian auto parts dealer, like in charge of U.S. nuclear security in Europe, a licensed liquor importer in the state of New Jersey, lest we forget, a beekeeper randomly for no reason.
Yeah.
Like
have I ever told you about the time I worked in a British pub kitchen?
For God's sake, no, of course not. But
I'll save that one for another time.
Who are you? Like, have you lived 1,000 lives? Like, how old are you? No, seriously, level with me.
Like
are you 400 years old? Like, seriously, what is happening here?
Okay, so I brought that story up because I thought it was an example of having a growth mindset. You know,
You're completely. You are totally blowing me off here. Like I'm trying to have
No, I like it. It can be an ongoing theme because I'm not done. There's more of these. But the Jaime Escalante thing is appropriate because I kind of broke the ice after. I went back to that middle school several years later, and there was like 4 more banners in the rafters in the gym of junior varsity quiz winning the district championship. Like after that, they believed they could do it.
Man, you turned that place around. Ben Rich, this is the guy.
Awesome.
He goes back to that place, and that vice principal is still there, and he takes him around. He's like, "This is the guy right here. He turned it around."
So at the end, like you said, even if you're kind of antagonistic to Carol Dweck and what she was trying to do, ultimately her point is that if you believe. If your motivation for making decisions about how to approach things is that you believe you can grow, you're more likely to succeed. And I think that's probably a good central assumption.
I think that is a universal truth. And unfortunately, for some reason, not everybody, like people, you can say that to people and they will acknowledge and they'll say that, yes, I understand that. But for some reason, very few people actually internalize that. Like, I like to think of one of the things, like this is probably the best lesson that I ever learned from my parents and my upbringing. And I don't know how I got it. It was probably a million little things over the course of my upbringing. But I have a strong understanding and a belief that if I don't like something about my life, I have the power to change it. Nobody else does. My life is not going to change by accident. It's going to be through deliberate decisions and actions on my part. No one else.
That's a very growth mindset.
Exactly. But I don't know how I got that. And I hope that I can impart that to my children. And this is the whole thing that I called that up until listening to this book, agency. Like, you have to have agency in your own life. And there are so many people in the world that, like, they'll say that they have agency, but you don't ever see it. You don't ever see them take the changes or take the steps in there that they need to make these changes. Like, I could be anything I want if I wanted to be. But either they're afraid to try or they're afraid of failure or they think it's too hard or for whatever reason they tell themselves some story and they don't ever get around to doing it. And that's the fixed mindset that this book was talking about.
All right. So tie a bow on it.
Tie a bow on the whole thing. You do have the power to change your life. You do. Like, it's going to be hard. No one ever said it's going to be easy. Life's hard. Get a helmet. You are better off and you are better served as a person, as a parent, as a relationship partner, as an employee, or as a boss if you believe that you can make changes and that you can influence the world for better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You really kind of blew my mind in taking an inventory of what your internal monologue is. I realized how uneven mine is. There are some areas in which I'm very much a fixed mindset and some in which I'm more growth. I don't know if it's the right answer that everywhere I'm somewhat fixed, I should be more growth. Maybe there's areas which I should be more fixed or some areas which I should be more growth. And I think that's going to be my takeaway from this, is to try to just be more deliberate about it.
That's the key, is the deliberate. Like, I think what I try to do in my life that I've done, it's very recent. In the last couple of years I've done this, is whenever I find myself in a situation where I feel strongly one way or another, I take a second to question my feelings. Like, do I feel this way because of reasons that are appropriate? Or do I just feel this way as a knee-jerk reaction to an emotional stimulus? So yeah. What should I be feeling in this moment?
I like that. All right. Well, we'll probably have to do fiction next time we do another book.
We are going to do fiction the next time we read a book because, like I said, Ben, I love you to death, buddy. And this book, though thought-provoking, was grueling. It was a grind, and it was a trial. I felt it was It was Sisyphusian because I'd be like listening to it. Like I listen to fiction books. I will digest 40-hour fiction books and be sad when they're over. Like, where did it all go? And I'm listening to this 10-hour psychology book, and I'm looking at it every.
Is this ever gonna end?
I'm looking at it every 3 minutes. Like it has to, like doing that little kid thing. Like it has to have been another hour, right? Oh, 15 minutes. Dang it, Carol Danvers. Wait, that's not her name. That was her name, right? Carol Danvers.
Dweck.
Dweck.
Carol Dweck.
Where's Danvers? Where did I get that from? Doesn't matter.
She's Captain Marvel.
Ah, another person that I'm disappointed with for many reasons. So that's appropriate.
All right. Well, I want to ask our listeners, give us your feedback. If you read along in the book, great. Let's hear what you had to say about it. I'll open up a thread on Reddit, and you can comment on Facebook as well. Please join in the discussion if you have something you want to add. If you just found the discussion lightning, even though you didn't want to read the book, great. Let us hear about it. Thank you for being a listener. Thank you for supporting the show, and we'll talk to you next time.